Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar that we have put together about a case study of accessible wildlife viewing. We're going to give it just about one more minute to let others enter the room, but you are in the right place. And if you can hear me talking, your sound is working. All right. Hello again. My name is Dr. Ashley Dare. I'm a professor in the Department of Fish and Wildlife Conservation at Virginia Tech. My pronouns are she and her. I consider myself a disabled wildlife viewer, and it's my privilege to be presenting this webinar today with Freya McGregor, who is actually going to be presenting the majority of this webinar, and has been leading this project at Virginia Tech. This work is funded by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Wildlife and Sport Fishing Restoration Program in conjunction with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Services or Wildlife Agencies. It's a multi-state grant. Um, and our presentation today is focused on the Neidrach Trail, a case study of accessible wildlife viewing in Colorado. So the work was done in collaboration with Colorado's State Fish and Wildlife Agency. So let me tell you a little bit about what we plan to cover today in this webinar. Um, First, we're going to start with a brief overview about why supporting disabled wildlife viewers matters. Those of you who joined our previous webinar, it's going to be a quick repeat of that information. For those of you who haven't, you will be hearing new information. Then we're going to talk about the definitions of an accessible trail. Since that's our focus for this webinar, we want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Then the majority of this is going to focus on the Neidrach Trail and its access features. Our hope is that by showcasing an existing wildlife viewing trail that's accessible, you'll see how your agency or organization can create something similar. And you'll be able to see the ways that access features play out on the landscape. We hope to have a question and answer with a previous park manager. She hasn't been able to join us yet, so we hope that she will be here. If she isn't, Freya is still going to be sharing a lot of quotes and insights from her. And then finally, we're going to talk about how the Neidrach Trail compares to best practices from the literature and from other best practice guidance documents that Freya has spent a lot of time collating and understanding, and will provide finally some advice for designing, building, or maintaining accessible trails for you at the end. So the focus on this is to really make this useful, usable to you. And please don't hesitate throughout the presentation to put questions that you might have into the chat or into the Q&A. We'll make sure that we get to those at the end of the presentation. And we really want to make sure that you feel like you're able to do something like this when you walk away from the webinar. Before we start the webinar, I did want to just acknowledge that this work is a collaboration with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Working Group that we've been working with for about 7 years now. We want to share a couple other products with you if you haven't already had a chance to take a look at them. We did a survey at the national level as well as in a bunch of states on wildlife viewers and understanding their relevancy and relationship with state fish and wildlife agencies. And then from there, we analyzed those insights specific to the issue of the urban-rural gradient and understanding wildlife viewers and the differences that might exist between urban versus rural viewers, as a lot of state agencies are shifting to doing more work in an urban setting. And then finally, our third phase of the project has focused on disabled wildlife viewers. Freya and Emily Singular worked together on a literature review for inclusion of disabled wildlife viewers. And some of the insights related to trails will be sprinkled into the presentation today, but there's a lot more in there that's useful to you. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at that. It's written in a way so that it can be really useful to state agency or other conservation or nature organizations. And then finally, Freya and Emily also did focus groups with disabled wildlife viewers to have insights coming directly from the people who agencies are hoping to work with more and be more inclusive of. So, really important to think about that disability voice throughout all of this. So, all of those are available on our website for wildlife viewing and as well as the report that relates to this work. So we'll be providing those throughout the presentation. And additionally, Freya is going to send you a bunch of links afterwards with the recording of this webinar if you'd like to share it with anyone else. So with that, I'd like to introduce Freya McGregor. We're really happy to have her working with us at Virginia Tech. Not only does she have experience as a researcher, but she's also an occupational therapist by training, which really brings a unique perspective to this work with disability and really excellent expertise to be integrating. So, Freya, take it away.
Thanks so much, Ashley. Hi, everyone. As Ashley said, my name's Freya McGregor. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a research associate in the DEA Human Dimensions Lab. I'm also a disabled birder and, as Ashley said, an occupational therapist with a clinical background in blindness and low vision services. So if you've seen the previous case study webinar about the Accessibility Advisory Committee in Texas, as Ashley said, you might be familiar with this, but just in case, I wanted to share two really important reasons about why supporting disabled wildlife viewers should matter to state wildlife agencies. First, a definition of disability. A lot of people think of wheelchair users when they think of disability, but disability is really, really broad. So the Centers for Disease Control defines disability as any condition of the body or mind that makes it more difficult for someone to do everyday activities, such as walking or communicating or interacting with the world around them. Really, really broad. People with temporary injuries, people with chronic illnesses, people who are neurodivergent or live with mental health challenges. Like this is a lot of people. People with blindness and low vision who are deaf or hard of hearing. And the CDC says that 1 in 4 Americans has a disability. So this isn't a little tiny portion of the population. This is like there's 25 people in this room right now. So 5 of us approximately here. Ashley and I have already identified ourselves as 2 of them. But anyway, this is a big group of folks. And when the national survey that Ashley mentioned that was done a few years ago through this project, we asked wildlife viewers if they experience accessibility challenges. We use that language because although there's nothing wrong with being disabled, that word is still so stigmatized and not everybody identifies as disabled. So instead we use accessibility challenges as a way of trying to capture the group of people that we were trying to capture. And the respondents, 39% of respondents told us that they experienced somewhat, quite a bit, or a great deal of accessibility challenges when they're wildlife viewing as a result of something to do with their body or their mind. So 39% is a lot higher than 1 in 4. It's more like 1 in 3. It's a bit more than 1 in 3. This is a lot of people. And if state wildlife agencies want to be relevant to their broad constituents, this is a huge potential population who might be feeling left behind and that their agency is not relevant if the agency is not meeting their access needs. So 39%, it's a big number. The second really important reason that state agencies should be working hard to support disabled wildlife viewers is that access and inclusion is federal law. And we're going to talk about one of these in particular today, the Architectural Barriers Act, which is where trail accessibility standards live in the United States. There's also Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. All of these federal laws have been around for several decades, and they boil down in a really kind of intense way is to all facilities. That includes nature centres, that includes bird blinds, designed and altered with federal funds must comply with federal accessibility standards. Some of those standards live in the Architectural Barriers Act. Some of those standards live in the Americans with Disabilities Act standards for accessible design, depending on which kind of component of the built environment they're talking about. The other big takeaway from these federal laws is that state wildlife agencies as Title II entities must ensure that people with disabilities have equal opportunities to participate in all programs they offer. And in this context, programs isn't environmental education programs or interpretive programs or adaptive hunting programs. It's those and also any other thing that the agency does for the benefit of the public. So being able to get into and experience the nature centre, or being able to navigate the website and make camping reservations, or being able to use trails. They're all considered programs in these federal laws. And so it's legally required. And this project, there are 4 case studies that I dived into really deeply. And one of them, the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, they got sued because they weren't complying with these federal laws. And Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, they got a big federal audit and found themselves in a little bit of a pickle because they weren't complying with these laws. So I don't tell you that to scare you so much as just it's a reality that this happens, and it causes a lot of work and a lot of stress for everyone involved, and so much better to be proactive about this stuff, so that if you did get audited or something like that, everything's going to be a lot smoother because you've already got so much squared away ahead of time. So, as Ashley mentioned, this is the 4th phase of this long-term project funded by the multi-state conservation grants, and it's a project about 4 different case studies. What happened was we knew that several state wildlife agencies were already doing really great work to increase access and inclusion for disabled wildlife viewers. But a lot of other states didn't know what was going on or how they could create a similar program themselves. Many state agencies only have one person in charge of all of the accessibility things across the whole agency. And many state agencies also only have one person involved in or overseeing wildlife viewing programs. So these folks just didn't have the capacity to do deep dives into how to create such programs from scratch. So the idea was that I could deep dive into the programs that already exist and develop case study reports and share them with you, like right now through this webinar, so that we can understand why these different programs are successful, and so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel and build something from scratch when there's already something that's likely to transfer into your context really well. This is the report from the first case study we did. If you haven't seen it, it's about establishing and engaging an accessibility advisory committee. I'm likening it to a recipe. I've been hanging out in the kitchens with these like amazing chefs and watching what they're doing and asking them all the questions and asking all the customers at the restaurant what they thought about the delicious meal that was cooked for them. And I've written the recipe from learning from all of them. My hope is that giving you the recipe and providing you with those ingredients means that you can bake that cake with success right out of the gate. If you want to swap dark chocolate chips for milk chocolate chips, because that makes more sense, that changing things a little bit makes more sense in your state or in your agency's context, totally fine. Please do that. But the hope is that you can bake this cake effectively with these case study reports. So Ashley will share the link in the chat for these, where you can get hold of that case study report, this case study report, and all the other resources that we've done in relation to supporting disabled wildlife viewers. Each of these case studies involved a site visit, photos of the program, in-depth interviews with staff and disabled participants, because it's really important that we understand from the actual people we're trying to serve if this thing is actually serving them or not, and any supporting resources that the agency was willing to share with me so that I could share them with you, such as outreach emails, liability forms, design plans. They're all copied and pasted into these reports so that you can copy and paste them and tweak them as necessary for your context. So this is the second case study of the 4 in this series. The first one, as I mentioned, was the Accessibility Advisory Committee in Texas. That's already available on our Wildlife Viewing Toolkit website. Today, we're going to talk about an accessible trail. And going forwards, we've got a report and a webinar about a loaner track chair program. Track chairs are off-road wheelchairs that are very popular for agencies and nature organizations to buy, but it's very easy to buy them and then not have an effective program around that. So if you'd like to learn more about how to make sure that that expense is effective, please come along to that webinar. It will be held in September. And we'll have a webinar and a report about an inclusive wildlife viewing program. What's happening in that social environment to create a program that feels inclusive. You can register for those webinars already. The links are available to register for them. And if you can't come along, we will send you a recording afterwards. So you might as well just register if you're interested in learning about those things as well. So it's time for a poll. I would love it if you would share some answers with me. I'm just going to set this poll up. Here we go. And I'll give you a couple of minutes. I'd love it if you would share your definition of an accessible trail. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just what you think an accessible trail is. I'm not testing you. I'm just curious. And if you would rate your knowledge on the different features that make up an accessible trail, how comfortable you are in collaborating with people with disabilities to create accessible outdoor experiences, and the biggest barrier you face in creating or supporting more accessible trails or wildlife viewing locations in your park or agency or organisation. So I'll give you a couple minutes to answer those questions. Okay, I'll give you 10 more seconds just to finish your thought, or scroll down if there's a couple more things you could answer. Okay, thank you very much for sharing your definition of accessible trails and a bit about your knowledge. Really appreciate learning from you about this. I'm just going to end. Oh, there's a couple more people. Okay, I'm going to count to 10 in my head. And verbalize some results that I can see here. Most people rated themselves, but well, about the knowledge of features that make up an accessible trail. One person said they were really confident with that. Most other people said they were sort of 2, 3 or 4 or 1, less confident perhaps with their, or less knowledgeable about the features that make up an accessible trail. I can also see that most of y'all are feeling somewhat comfortable or very comfortable with collaborating with people with disabilities to create accessible outdoor experiences. That's awesome. Sweet. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. And I very much look forward to diving into that further afterwards. Thank you again. Okay, so before we really explore the Neidrach Trail, the first thing we need to look to answer is what an accessible trail actually is. It turns out there's multiple definitions of this. So I interviewed the Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator at Colorado Parks and Wildlife. This is not meant to slam him. This is representative of many people that I've talked to at state wildlife agencies across the country. He defined an accessible trail as one that complies with the relevant trail accessibility standards, which are the Architectural Barriers Act Section 1017 on trails. However, talking to a lot of disabled wildlife viewers through our focus groups and through this case study, it turns out that the public's definition of an accessible trail is a trail that's usable by the widest variety of people. People using wheelchairs, people with visual and learning disabilities, or all kinds of different people with different access needs. These are not the same thing. These definitions are not the same. And the trail accessibility standards, the ABA standards, are really, really focused on people using mobility devices, which makes some sense because those access needs are often quite different to standing and walking people. But that's only one portion of all the different people, all the different disabilities that are out there. So these are not the same things at all. In summary, the government definition seems to be, for an accessible trail, seems to be that accessible equals compliance with the standards. Whereas the public's definition is that accessible is usable by every kind of mind and body. Again, these are not the same thing. But we're not going to convince the public to come towards this compliance definition because they have more access needs than are met by this compliance definition. So if we want to serve the public, be relevant to our constituents, we're going to need to move closer towards the public definition of accessible trails. So a couple of suggestions based on our research and the other research that's being published is for state agencies to go beyond the minimum accessibility standards. They are the minimum, they are not the maximum, and shift from this compliance mindset into a universal design mindset. If you're not familiar with the principles of universal design, I will share them with you shortly, so hang tight. Another strategy is to consult with a variety of disabled people throughout the design and building and ongoing maintenance of accessible trails. If you're not sure how to do that, establishing an accessibility advisory committee is a really awesome way of doing that. So please check out our past webinar and report about doing that. Another strategy is to use clear, specific languages when describing different features. Calling something an accessible trail is really just a claim until you back up why you think it is accessible. A little bit more specific, if we're grading this, an assignment, maybe you get a C for describing a trail as this trail complies with accessibility standards. That at least tells us what you mean when you say it is accessible, if that is what you mean. But an A+ description is to provide detailed, specific information about what to expect on websites, on maps, and at trailheads, because everybody has different access needs, everybody has different values and interests. Maybe someone wants to have a really gentle time in nature, and someone else with the same access needs wants to really push themselves and go really hard and have a challenging experience. So letting disabled trail users determine for them what is accessible to them on that day is the best way we can support disabled trail users and genuinely walk the walk about creating accessible experiences. The most accessible experiences are the ones where we can decide for ourselves if it works. I have visited a lot of wildlife viewing locations that I hoped would be accessible. I've just finished writing a book about accessible birding locations across the US. I had to visit every single location myself, and there's more than 180 locations in this book. I had to visit a lot more because many of them were not what I hoped that they would be. And so I tell you this from my experience and from experience from our focus group participants, that very often locations will just tell us the trail name. They won't give us any more information than that, which does not help us know if it's a trail that we might be able to experience successfully. Sometimes locations will tell us the trail name is accessible, like the Chautauqua Nature Trail, and there's the stick figure, the international symbol of accessibility on it. Okay, that's great. And also, like I said before, it's kind of just a claim until you explain why you think it's accessible. The photo on the left lists the Bob White ADA Trail, and just a call out, a reminder that the Americans with Disabilities Act doesn't actually cover trail accessibility standards. So please don't describe it as ADA accessible. It doesn't make sense. And probably you could create a more creative trail name for this. Accessible trails, okay, but as long as you're providing more information. Instead, what disabled visitors need is a whole lot more information. And this, you're about to get a lot of text on your screen. It's the example being used is the Neidrach Trail, which we're about to start talking about. But this comes from focus groups and from a whole lot of research done with disabled trail users and outdoor lovers. Folks need to know the trailhead location, the parking situation, the bathroom situation. We all need to use bathrooms one way or another, and some people need to use them more often or with sudden urgency, chronic illnesses often. It's okay if you don't have a bathroom on site, but transparency is the gold here. Tell us that so that we know we're going to need to find a gas station on the way in and use the bathroom there. Like, give us that information so that we can be empowered. Drinking water, people want to know the trail distance, the type of trail, out and back, loop, lollipop, those kinds of things. The surfaces that the trail involves, the gradient or the slope, the width. This is particularly important for many folks using mobility devices because they're often wider than someone standing, but also people who want to hold the hands of their kids or their girlfriend or boyfriend, or people who are using a dog guide or a human guide to navigate the trail, or people using sign language who need to be able to see each other and each other's hands as they're traveling, otherwise they can't communicate with each other. So trail width is really important. Cross slope is how much of an angle you're on as you're traveling down that trail. That matters to a lot of people with balance and vertigo issues and using mobility devices. Bench areas. In the literature, consistently, benches are the most requested access feature. Benches are golden, but telling us the number of benches you have, if you have a 1 mile trail and 5 benches, but they're all clustered in the same place, that's not the same thing as having 5 distinct areas for me to rest. So tell us about the bench areas, the areas where there are benches, how many of them there are along the way. Shade, lots of folks with different disabilities have difficulties with thermoregulation, or if they overheat, their symptoms get a lot worse. We all should be protecting ourselves from UV. Skin cancer is no good. So tell us about the shade and any obstacles in the trail. Again, transparency is really important here. Don't pretend like it's perfect if it's not. Give us that information so that we know what to expect and can have a successful experience. Steps, potholes, root heave or rocks embedded in the trail, give us that information and tell us how far into the trail it exists. Because if there are 300 steps 3 miles in, many people will be quite happy to explore the first 3 miles and then just come back around. But if the 300 steps are half a mile in, it might not feel like it's worthwhile going if someone can't do steps. This is golden. I mentioned the principles of universal design earlier. These were developed by the Center for Universal Design at North Carolina State University, and they're to be used for creating locations, objects, software, any kind of thing that you might design. Equitable use means that all users can use it in the same way. That's the big one for accessible trails. All users can use it in the same way, not some users can, and other users just miss out. That's not it. The other big one when it comes to accessible trails, we'll talk about this a bit more, is the perceptible information, which is providing various methods for someone to receive information, such as printed text, audio, braille. Maybe they can communicate by phone and by email and in person. That comes up when we're talking about interpretive signs, which we will talk about shortly. The other one that comes up a little bit with accessible trails, we won't talk about this much today, but if you're designing observation blinds or observation platforms and you want them to be as usable as possible, the size and space for approach is important. Making sure that there's enough space in the door frame and within that space for someone using a mobility device to get in, move around and get out again. Many bird blinds are real tight and only some people can use them. So again, we're trying to go from that compliance mindset of just checking the boxes from the trail accessibility standards into this universal design mindset. This is how we can best meet the needs of the community. I spoke to the statewide interpretation and wildlife viewing coordinator at Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and she said that she feels it's so important to have accessible trails that are open to everyone because that's probably where we're doing our education and meeting people out on these accessible trails. And everyone can benefit from these accessible trails. She mentioned people with a stroller, they're not disabled, but they have access needs that are different to perhaps the typical body that we're thinking about. She said it's not just for wheelchairs, it's for everybody. Okay, so let's dive into the Neidrach Trail and what it looks like. So the Neidrach Trail is located at Barr Lake State Park in Colorado. This is a screenshot from Google Maps. So Barr Lake State Park is northwest of Denver. It's not very far from the Denver airport. You can see airplanes coming into land and take off from there. And you might be able to tell from this map, it's not in the mountains. It's kind of close to the mountains. You can see the mountains from Barr Lake State Park, but it's really in the prairie. Denver and Fort Collins is up the road. They're the biggest metropolitan areas, so it's very highly visited. This is the map from the brochure of Barr Lake State Park. Most of the park is this big lake, really a dam, that's used for irrigation in the surrounding areas. There is a road that comes in from the right. It travels off over to an accessible fishing pier and then down to the nature centre. And over here is the Neidrach Trail. There's also a service road which is doubles as the Lake Loop Trail that travels all the way around the lake, a complete loop, which is really cool. And there's several short sections of boardwalk further south along this lake where people can go off the Lake Loop Trail out onto these boardwalks to see bald eagles. There is a bucket load of bald eagles that overwinter at Barr Lake, and it's a really, really big deal. They have a big festival in the winter for these bald eagles. And Barr Lake State Park is a bird magnet itself. If you're not a birder, 370 species is a huge number of birds to have been reported in one place. This, I think, perhaps because this is a big body of water in the prairie, it acts as that bird magnet, but really exciting for wildlife viewing. So I mentioned I've interviewed several staff for this project. I talked to the current park manager. I talked to the previous park manager, who was the one who oversaw and initiated the redesign of this trail several years ago. I talked to the park resource technician, who described himself as the maintenance guy. I talked to the statewide interpretation and wildlife viewing coordinator, and I talked to the workforce development and ADA accessibility coordinator. That's a long title. They're really two different jobs, but one person does them at Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Like training up staff and incoming staff, that's workforce development, and then his other hat is accessibility compliance. Most of his time wearing that hat is spent approving accommodation requests for hunters with disabilities. He doesn't do a whole lot with trails, but it was great to chat with him. So these are the folks that I talked to at Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And I also sat along the Neidrach Trail for several days last August and talked to 5 disabled trail users. I'm using their photos with permission, but I've changed their names. So Susan, it was the first time she'd been to Barr Lake State Park, and she had learned online, not through the park's website, but through Google reviews, that the Neidrach Trail was flat and wide and not very busy. She told me that she used to be a marathon runner, but she broke her ankle in 2015 and has had a total ankle replacement where they cut out like the bones of around your ankle and like replace it with a piece of metal. Quite amazing, quite an intense surgery. She said, once you break your ankle as badly as I did, if you're active, you tend to have ongoing issues, and I'm going to be having my 6th surgery this fall on that ankle. Susan talked about, for her, lateral movement, moving from side to side, was really hard now that she had this ankle replacement. So your ankles do a lot of stabilizing, and maybe you're not doing like big, gigantic side-to-side movements, but just balancing, especially on uneven surfaces, that involves the lateral movement too. And so she talked about gravel. Nobody likes gravel as a surface, by the way. No one I've ever interacted with or read research about likes gravel. Gravel's really hard because it shifts underfoot. And so that lateral movement's really tough for her. She also talked about using trails with mountain bikers or equestrians on the trail. And she was not invalidating their desire to use trails too. But those folks are using trails a little differently. They're often going a bit faster than her, and she having to suddenly jump out of the way of a mountain biker or a horse rider that she didn't realize was coming. She found really stressful, especially because this lateral movement was really challenging for her. So they were big access needs for her. I spoke to Fred, who also was a first-time visitor at at Barr Lake State Park, and he was looking for wildlife, which is why he'd been out on the Neidrach Trail. He told me he had pronated discs between L4 and L5, the lumbar spine lower down in his back, so lots of pain, and not he was limited with carrying weight, so he was not allowed to do any impact sports or paddle boarding because of this injury. He's hoping he was going to get better and he'd be allowed to get better. But he talked about how the Neidrach Trail was a low impact trail for him. He could use it. It wasn't too hard because it was flat and firm and stable for him to enjoy. I spoke to Rich, who told me he had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD. He comes to Barr Lake State Park all the time because he loves birds and he loves taking photos of them, especially the eagles. It's close to home for him, and he always sees something interesting. And he talked about things like the shade being important for him. He has a sensory sensitivity. He does not like sunscreen on his skin. That feeling is really awful. And so, because he knew that the Neidrach Trail is shaded, because he's been there several times before, he made a decision. This was a hot day, by the way. This was like a 90-degree day in August. He made a decision not to wear sunscreen because he did not like that feeling because he knew that there was shade along this trail. I spoke to Rosa, who was at Barr Lake State Park with her daughter, also in the photo, and their dog, to have photos taken, professional photos taken in a nice place out in nature. Rosa told me she'd broken her ankle twice and has a hairline fracture in the back of her knee. She had been using a wheelchair for several weeks at this point after the most recent injury, and she had just been given permission 4 days before from her doctor to start weight bearing on her injured leg. She said, "It's still scary for me because you don't trust it, because you've been using the other foot for so long." I watched Rosa, I will talk about the canal bridge in a minute. I watched Rosa transfer out to standing from her wheelchair and try and step up onto the canal bridge. It it looked like it was really hard work for her. She was really slow, really hesitant. It was, and talking to her afterwards, she confirmed it was really difficult. And I also spoke to Dave, who was at Barr Lake with his Navy Reserve unit. They were having a picnic to celebrate the end of the military financial year, and he enjoys fishing, and so he'd walk the Neidrach Trail hoping to find a fishing spot he could come back to in the future. He said, I've had a bum knee for a while because the military is rough on your body. We all have different ailments or sorenesses or injuries. Are we completely disabled? No. Are we working through them? Yes. So a wide variety of different access needs. Many of these are mobility related, movement, forwards, movement related disabilities. And many of these folks also, it's a thing that has happened to them as they've gone through life. It's not a thing that they were born with. It's just a thing that their body, if you use your body long enough, stuff starts breaking after a while. The disability community is the only community you can join at any time. And many of these folks kind of illustrate that. So I wanted to give you a tour of the Neidrach Trail if you've never been. It is a fantastic trail. First, you drive in, you park by the Nature Centre, and there is a literal welcome sign, "Welcome to Barr Lake Nature Centre." That might seem minor, but the research tells us that for some people, especially people who are new to being outdoors or who are from historically marginalised communities, a literal welcome sign can mean a lot and make them feel warmer and more included. Inside the Nature Centre, there is this indoor bird viewing area with a couch and a bit of circulation space on either side of it so that someone with a mobility device can pull up to see through this big window, and there's bird feeders there. The Nature Centre is air conditioned, it's heated in the winter. There's a whole lot of exhibits in there. Not everyone can or wants to go out on a trail, but might want to get out into nature somehow. So this is a really cool alternative, accessible wildlife viewing location. On the outside of the Nature Centre, there are bathrooms inside and also on the outside. They are all gender, which matters for trans and non-binary folks who might not be safe going into a men's or a women's bathroom, but it also matters for people who are caregivers who are looking after someone of a different gender, being able to go and use the bathroom without getting weird looks or feeling like it's inappropriate. It's an accessible bathroom and it complies with the Americans with Disabilities Act standards for accessible design. And it's unlocked 24/7, which is huge because if you have bathrooms inside of your nature centre, they're not accessible if they're locked, if it's 7 p.m. on a Sunday night and your nature centre's closed, but people are still using your trail. Again, tell people that so that they know. There's also drinking water on the outside of the nature centre, super awesome. And there was a whole bunch of really in-depth interpretive signs on the outside of the nature centre too. Again, I've been to a lot of accessible birding in particular places. And yes, interpretive signs on trails. Yes, kiosks, like trailhead kiosks that tell us information. I have never seen an interpretive sign literally on the wall of the outside of a nature centre or a visitor centre. And I thought it was really cool because you didn't have to go down the trail to have access to that information. And you could enjoy it in the shade of the porch of this nature centre too. Here's another screenshot from Google Maps showing the Neidrach Trail. So just to give you some more orientation, this is the parking lot at the end of the road up the top. The nature centre is right by that. And then to get onto the Neidrach Trail, you come out of the nature centre or out of the parking lot over this canal bridge. This is an irrigation canal that travels all the way down here. And this, parallel to it, is the Lake Loop Trail, that service road that's also a trail all the way around the lake. So you go over the canal bridge, you're along the Lake Loop Trail just for a very short distance, and then the Neidrach Trail. There's the stick and then the loop. So this is a lollipop trail. This sort of intersection that looks like the loop is actually a figure-8 trail that doesn't actually exist. I don't know why it's on Google Maps. So this is the canal bridge that I talked about. I want you to think really hard about if you're describing or naming trails anywhere, where the trailhead actually is, because the state park considers the bit where the Neidrach Trail begins off the Lake Loop Trail to be the beginning of the Neidrach Trail. But to get there, you have to. There's no alternative. You have to travel over that canal bridge. The canal bridge is rubberized. It's a 12% grade, and there's a bit of a tread obstacle where the surface of the hard-packed crushed stone trail turns into that concrete bit before the bridge starts. This is the part I was telling you that Rosa had a really hard time navigating. Her daughter had been pushing her in a wheelchair the whole time. She couldn't push her up the slope of this bridge. So Rosa stood up because she was now allowed to wait there and then had a really hard time. The bridge is made out of metal. It was boiling hot to touch, stepping up over this relatively small but very significant for Rosa step. So this really needs to be the start of the trail. You get over the bridge along the Lake Loop Trail. This big tree here, this is the tree you can see hanging over this part, which is where the state park considers the trail to begin. Okay, so you head down the stick of the lollipop and you get to the intersection where the loop trail starts. It's big open prairie. From there, you go. We're going left. From here, we're going to turn left down the trail. After a while, a boardwalk section starts and you get to this big inland deck or rest area. There's 4 movable benches. They don't have backrest or armrests. That is relevant. And there's several interpretive signs and there's a bit of shade. Keep traveling along. You get to this section where there are self-seeded cottonwood trees. The park manager told me that they seeded themselves when the trail got redone. They like disturbed ground, and it was her favorite part of the trail. It's a little bit windy through there. It's shaded. It feels like a bit of a fairy forest. It's really cool, but there is a problem with this that I'll get to later. Keep going around the trail, you get on another section of wooden boardwalk. You can see the lake in this photo. It's a bit away. In the winter, the lake is full and it comes right up under this trail, under this boardwalk. But as the spring and summer progress, more of the water is pulled out for irrigation and the lake starts to recede. In the background, you can also see the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains. And an observation deck, which has a roof for shade and rain protection, another movable bench, a permanent spotting scope, and one of the several interpretive signs along the trail. Keep going down the trail, you'll find the fourth bench area. The first was at the trailhead. The second was that first inland deck. The third was at the observation deck. And then this is the fourth. However, there's a whole bunch of vegetation between the actual trail and where that bench is. It's just grown up in the last maybe week or so, but it's quite thick and it's about as high as my knee, like at least a foot off the ground. And there are definitely people out there who would really like to sit on that bench for a rest, who might not feel confident navigating through that vegetation. So mowing, trail maintenance in general is an ongoing issue we'll talk more about shortly. And I invite you, if you're thinking about bench placement, to consider placing benches. They need to be not encroaching on the width of the trail, but if you have them too far from the trail, other barriers might sort of invent themselves like this. So think about where benches are placed. Near the bench, there's one of these lift the flap interpretive signs, where not only is it teaching wildlife viewing or wildlife listening tips, but it's this multi-sensory engagement in wildlife, which many people bird by ear exclusively or prefer to bird by ear or want to learn more of those skills. And so this lift the flap sign helps teach some of that multi-sensory enjoyment. And then you get to the end of the loop, back up the stick of the lollipop, back over the canal bridge, and there's another welcome sign. It says welcome back. I've never been anywhere that had a welcome back sign at the end of a trail. Really, really cool. So now you know what the Neidrach Trail is like. Susan described it really well. She said it's pretty easy to go around. It's pretty flat. There's no obstructions. There's shade. There's benches. The trail is wide. You're not worried about getting in someone else's way. There are places to pull off and see something else. It's not overrun with bikes. It's a peaceful place to go for a short or a long walk. You don't have to have any particular ability to enjoy this trail. Bikes are allowed at Barr Lake, but not on this at Barr Lake, but not on this trail. So that explains that. So yeah, sounds great. Barr Lake State Park has a bunch of other access features too, and I wanted to share these with you because it's such a great example of doing one thing to increase accessibility is amazing, but the more you do, the more effective it will be. The more people will feel welcome, the more people will be excited to visit this location. And there's quite a lot that Barr Lake State Park has going on. I've mentioned several times the Lake Loop Trail, and this is a photo of it on the left. It's an 8.8-mile trail that's also the service road for the irrigation company that goes all the way around the lake. Much of it looks like this photo. It is hard-packed crushed stone, firm and stable surface, very wide, and basically flat, less than 5% gradient throughout. So it's a pretty accessible option for many people. There is a golf cart that seats 13 people. They call it the Eagle Express, and it travels, volunteers drive it down the Lake Loop Trail to one of those boardwalks on the southern edge of the lake where the best bald eagle viewing happens, because not everyone can walk a mile and a half there and a mile and a half back. Some people are transporting scopes or cameras, heavy, awkward to walk with, especially that far. They have programs down there and that big gazebo like yoga. Carrying a yoga mat that far probably is not that fun. There's a whole lot of reasons that different people would really appreciate getting that prime wildlife viewing experience, but that they can't walk that far by themselves. They also have a wheelchair-friendly golf cart. Super helpful. So many golf carts require 1 or 2 steps up, and not everyone can do that. So the Osprey is their wheelchair-friendly golf cart. They have 2 track chairs. If you want to learn more about track chairs, come to our next webinar about the Loaner Track Chair program in Michigan. Unfortunately, although there are 2 track chairs there, I didn't see any of them in the visitor center and I also in the nature center, and I also didn't see any information that they existed, and neither did Susan, who talked to me about her elderly mother who would love to come out to this place but wouldn't be able to get around it on her own, but she doesn't use a wheelchair every day. So what would she do? Well, there are loaner track chairs, but Susan had no idea because there was no information about that at the nature center. So if you want to learn more about effective marketing and communication about track chairs, please come to the next webinar about them. There's an accessible fishing pier, which the current park manager told me inherently doubles as an accessible boardwalk for wildlife viewing. They allow boating in the northern half of the lake, which I'm adding here because birding by boat is an accessible form of wildlife viewing for many people. Folks who have knee injuries or who have trouble walking or anything like that, if their arms and shoulders are okay, they can kayak or canoe or paddleboard. So that is a really interesting alternative way of supporting disabled wildlife viewers. By chance, the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies headquarters is at Barr Lake State Park. This is a big nonprofit that does a lot of bird research and conservation work, and they provide bird-related programming at the state park, which is really cool. What a great partnership. And they're really lucky they have a nonprofit, Friends of Barr Lake, who do a lot of things, including providing volunteers to staff the nature centre, driving the Eagle Express and the Osprey, running the Bald Eagle Festival, and fundraising for the state park. So really amazing. I consider that an access feature because they fund so many of these access improvements at Barr Lake. So how did the Neidrach Trail get built in the beginning? I talked to the previous park manager about this, and she shared with me this photo of a newspaper clipping from the local newspaper published in 1982. In this photo, Mrs. Robert Neidrach, I don't know what her first name was, sadly, is cutting a ribbon to open the trail that was named after her husband, who was an environmental educator and very beloved in the community. Now, I don't know Mrs. Robert Neidrach, but looking at this photo, there are two men standing next to her, one on each side, holding her under her arms as if to support her balance-wise. She's also wearing sunglasses and she's holding a long cane. I mentioned my clinical background as an occupational therapist is in blindness and low vision services, and I recognise that as a long cane, which is used by lots of people with visual disabilities to help them know what they're going to come up to as they're travelling down anywhere, as they're walking anywhere. So my educated guess is that she has a visual disability, which might be why naming a trail after her husband, and she's there opening it, maybe so the connection there between accessible trails maybe that's it. I don't know. Anyway, 1982, the original Neidrach Trail was built and opened, and in 2013 to 2016, the previous park manager oversaw the redesign. The trail was getting run down. It wasn't compliant with some of the accessibility standards that it should have been, just because they'd changed since the trail was originally built. So she oversaw this large project, and she collaborated with her regional supervisor, different project managers, several different funders, an external contractor who actually did the construction of the trail, and members of the public to learn more about what would be useful for them with this new trail. So this photo was taken during this redesign process, which is really helpful because it gives us a bit of information about what ingredients went into this trail being redone. The first thing that was laid down was riprap, which are these really big jagged rocks, and that was to raise the surface above the level of the lake. The lake does a lot of erosion on this trail, so they wanted to get it up a bit higher to try and minimize that erosion when the lake is full. Then these spread footings, these long concrete blocks were put down on top for two reasons. One is to create a level surface to work off, and the second reason is to spread the weight of the boardwalk over a larger area. These blocks are quite long. On top of that is this steel beam structure that's sort of the skeleton that connects then between the spread footings, and on that is where the actual boardwalk and the safety barriers were built. Funding came from several places, and I think this is a really great illustration of thinking outside the box to make something happen. So much of the funding, half of the funding, came from the Adams County Open Space Grant. Adams County is where Barr Lake State Park is, and luckily for Barr Lake State Park and everyone who visits, they have a whole lot of funding to support more outdoor recreation in the county. So half the funding came from that grant. Great Outdoors Colorado had a grant that's through the Colorado Lottery that goes to outdoor recreation as well. So some money came from that. The Friends of Barr Lake raised $5,000, and there were some matching in-state trail funds as well. Again, lots of different pots of gold here for funding this big project, and I think it's a really good illustration of trying to mixing and matching and making the puzzle pieces fit together so that you can do this really cool thing, not being dissuaded by the fact that there isn't one perfect grant that will cover everything you want. As I recall, the Friends of Barr Lake, the money that they raised covered the new interpretive signs. Amazing, perfect. So they could kind of, the previous park manager was able to put these together. One big thing that is clear in the literature, it's clear in my own experience, and it was very clear in interviews here and visiting the Neidrach Trail, is that trail maintenance is an ongoing process. So I spoke to the full-time park resource technician. He's full-time at Barr Lake. He's not across multiple sites. He's not only working 1 day a week, he's there full time. And it's still hard work for him to keep on top of the trail maintenance needs for the Neidrach Trail. He balances a bunch of responsibilities, including vehicle maintenance, water system testing, plumbing, electrical, and carpentry things that happen, janitorial duties, landscaping. He's got a lot on his plate. And he told me that very often something happens that a tree fell down on the safety barrier just before I got there. He didn't expect that. Like the next day, he had a plan, but it had to be shifted because this new thing happened that he had to go and put out the fire for before he could attend to the other things he was expecting to do that day. He also oversees teams of volunteers, often corporate volunteers coming from Denver, who come out once a month and assist with staining the boardwalk, which helps protect the wooden boards from sun damage, from the cold and the ice in the winter, and from all the grit that people are traipsing over those boards all the time. And staining this boardwalk helps it last a lot longer. As I said, he's constantly prioritizing tasks against other needs. So even though talking to him, he clearly was very well aware of the needs of the Neidrach Trail to be as accessible as possible, but sometimes he just couldn't physically make that happen on that day. Even though this trail gets the most attention because it is the most visited trail in the park. So, Ashley, do we have the previous park manager with us? I'm guessing we might not.
Yeah, Freya, I am not sure, but I don't believe so. I'm
No
not.
worries. Okay,
Yeah.
so thanks, Ashley. One thing that I learned interviewing both the previous park manager and the current park manager is that in this role, sometimes things happen and you absolutely have to go and attend that right now. Sort of like the park resources technician, but with more authority. So she was going to be here with us today. She might jump in at the end. We might be able to talk with her a bit more at the end, but I hope everything's going well for her today. So I wanted to share with you how the Neidrach Trail compares to accessibility best practices. This is not designed to slam the Neidrach Trail or to be dismissive of all the work that the park resources technician and the park manager and everyone else at Barr Lake State Park is doing. This is a case study, and my job as a researcher is to tell you facts. And so this is a comparison of what we know as best practices and how the Neidrach Trail stacks up to that. So the Architectural Barriers Act, Section 1017, which is the one that covers trails, says that trails, the surfaces should be firm, stable, and slip resistant. So the Neidrach Trail has hard-packed crushed stone and a wooden boardwalk. So they are both firm, stable, and slip-resistant surfaces. The width should be a minimum of 36 inches. There's additional guidance depending on how far that is before you need to have a wider space, like a pull-out, so that people can pass each other without being forced off the trail and so on. And the Neidrach Trail is a minimum of 44 inches up to a maximum of 96 inches. So excellent. And the cross slope, again, that angle you're on as you're traveling down the trail should be less than 2%. So you're allowed to have a little bit of cross slope, and that actually helps with water drainage. So you reduce channeling and rutting in the trails and potholes, but not very much. And the Neidrach Trail cross slope is less than 2%. So full marks for the Neidrach Trail about surfaces, width, and cross slope. We're back to the canal bridge. The standards, the US federal standards for trails say there's a whole lot in here. This gets a bit nuanced, but basically, as relevant here, you're allowed to have gradient of 12% for up to a maximum of 10 feet. To measure gradient, you use an inclinometer. This is a really hard thing to teach because even showing you this photo of the bridge, like you're going to have to trust me. I have an inclinometer. I did measure this. This is 12%. It is longer than 10 feet though. And if you have gradient up to 12%, there needs to be a 60 by 60 inch flat resting area so that someone can travel up a little bit and then rest, or travel down a little bit and then rest. And that's not what happens on the canal bridge. You're allowed to have 5% slope for as long as you want. They're up to 5%. So the canal bridge, as I said, is 12%, but doesn't have that. It's longer than 10 feet. And then after that, the trail is no greater than 5%. So that's great. The Neidrach Trail, this is my symbol for needs a bit more work here. I think we need a different bridge because the bridge really is part of the Neidrach Trail because you have to navigate it to get to the trail, and it's a bit steep. And okay, the focus group that we did these focus groups 2 years ago, talking to a bunch of disabled and neurodivergent wildlife viewers, and they wanted not as many benches as possible, many benches along trails that were in the shade, that have back support and that have a view. Back support, they shared with us, was really important. If you want actually to rest your body, being able to lean back is the way that you can rest. And people with chronic fatigue and pain issues, that really makes a difference for a more enjoyable sit. So these benches, at least in this inland area, they don't have back support. But they do have a view, and most of them are in the shade, so that's really cool. 2 of the benches do have back support. They all have a view, which is awesome. So there's a little bit of room here to tweak this, but we're doing pretty well, the Neidrach Trail. The focus groups wanted observation platforms or blinds to have no steps, and this observation platform has no steps. It's in the shade, even better. There's a bench, great, we know that's important. And there's a permanent spotting scope, which one of our interviewees in this case study said he really liked because he didn't have binoculars and he was able to enjoy this spotting scope. It didn't cost any money and he appreciated that. So good work on the Neidrach Trail. The focus group wanted accessible bathrooms to be nearby features that were supposed to be accessible, like accessible trails. And as we've already talked about, the Neidrach Trail has this accessible all-gender flush toilet at the nature centre that's unlocked 24/7. So that, fantastic, very, very good. The focus groups also wanted interpretive signs with tactile components. Tactile, things you can touch, things that you can engage with your hands, but also you can learn information that way. Now, these aren't quite tactile signs. I'm sort of stretching that definition a little bit here, but these lift the flap signs, there is something to do with them. You can engage with them in a physical way by lifting that flap. It's not quite a tactile sign. I'll show you one of those in a second. But there were a lot of interpretive signs along the Neidrach Trail that had colour illustrations and wildlife watching tips. And so they were pretty good. But we could perhaps add a few more signs with tactile components to really hit this mark. Speaking of interpretive signs, there are several very clear standards about interpretive signs and what makes them accessible. If you'd like to read more about them, please check out the literature review report that we did. We'll share that link again in the chat because there's a whole lot more about interpretive signs and writing text in plain language and things like that make interpretive signs accessible. So this is a sign from the Neidrach Trail, and I mentioned tactile elements before. That lump on the left, that's a tactile component. It's 3D, it's touchy-feely, you can stick your hands in it, it's describing cavities, and you can learn about a cavity by feeling it on this sign. Really cool. Another element of tactile signs, interpretive signs is the sign being tilted towards the trail at a 45-degree angle. So that means instead of having the sign facing you completely vertically or having the sign parallel to the surface of the trail looking straight up at the sky, instead the sign is tipped at 45 degrees towards the trail. It's the easiest way for people to be able to read what's on the sign. So is the height of the sign. And the recommendations are to have the bottom of the sign 32 inches above the surface of the trail. Along with that 45-degree angle, this means that standing people, short people, kids, people seated in mobility devices, they can all read this sign easily. Uh, the signs should have a non-glare finish and not use a white background. Outdoors in the sun, white can be really bright, and many people, especially people with low vision, have glare, and many neurodivergent people with sensory sensitivities can have glare sensitivity. It might not seem like much to you, but it can be like really too bright for someone else to look at. So we want to avoid that glare as much as possible. And we need to maintain these signs to ensure that they stay legible. I'm sure you've seen signs, interpretive signs with like mold or algae or something. Maybe not algae. Let's go with mold. Moss growing on them, scratches all over them, fading, peeling. That's not helpful for folks who want to learn the thing on the sign if they can't actually read the sign. And finally, ideally, there's an audio option, that thing from the principles of universal design about perceptible information. Not everyone can access printed text. So having an option that communicates the same things through sound is really awesome. When you're writing this text, there's a few things to keep in mind to make it as readable as possible. One of them is to use sans serif font. Times New Roman, if you think of that font, on a capital T, there's like little twiddly bits on the end of the horizontal bar, and there's another little flourish on the bottom of the trunk of the capital T. They're called serifs. Sans means without, so sans serifs don't have those little flourishes. The text that I am using in this PowerPoint is a sans serif font. The reason that's important is because often those serifs bleed into the next letter, and it can make it hard for people to like identify where one letter ends and one letter starts, which can make it really difficult to read. So sans serif font is the most readable kind of font. We want to have strong contrast between the background color and the color of the text. Black and white have the best contrast. They are the most different, but we just learned not to use white. So this sign is using an off-white and like a really light tan with black text. Great, as easy as possible to see the words. The text should be left justified. This is important when you're writing paragraphs because it's a lot easier for people to read across the line and come back to the beginning of the line when it is in the same place. The paragraph should be short and concise, and the main point should be understood within 45 seconds of reading. Folks are out to enjoy nature, like they're on their way. They're not going to read an entire essay. You just lose people. So make them quick and to the point, and have sentences that are 15 to 20 words long to make it as easy to digest that information as possible. Okay, some more standards. So the Architectural Barriers Act says that any tread obstacles, so rocks embedded in the surface, steps, roots sticking up, root heave it's called when it like pushes up like through the pavement, potholes, they're all tread obstacles. If the trail is boardwalk, you're allowed to have ½ an inch of a tread obstacle. If it's any other material, you can have up to 2 inches, and that's it. Shouldn't be more than that. But there's several places on the Neidrach Trail, particularly here in these transitions between a hard-packed crushed stone surface and another surface type, where that tread obstacle is up to 3 inches high. This is a maintenance thing. This is an erosion thing, and needing to come back with some more of that hard-packed crushed stone and pack it down so that there isn't that small but significant step up is a maintenance need. And it's just an ongoing challenge for the park resources technician to keep up with this. As I mentioned earlier, I watched Rosa have a really hard time navigating this step up onto the canal bridge. So it might not mean much for you, but it definitely means a lot for some people. I mentioned earlier about these self-seated cottonwoods. Okay, so the standards, the trail accessibility standard says that any obstacles in the tread width shall not extend more than 4 inches into that width between 27 and 80 inches from the surface. That's about the height that somebody's head and torso will be as they are traveling down the surface. And the reason for this, have you ever been on a trail where there's like a big branch kind of hanging down over the trail, and maybe it was easy for you to just crouch down under it? Not everyone can do that. Or just walk around it because you saw it, so you just dodged it. Well, not everyone is fully sighted. And it's a real bad day when someone with a visual disability clocks their head on a branch that they had no idea was there, that shouldn't really have been there. So, although these self-seeded cottonwoods are really cool, it's a lovely little, I said it like a fairy little woodland. There are a couple of these trees they've just grown across the trail between 27 and 80 inches from the surface. Perhaps taking out just those trees would be a really good thing, even though that whole segment of the trail is a really cool little experience. So unfortunately, the Neidrach Trail doesn't get full marks for that. The trail standards also says that trailhead signs need to include the trail's length, the surfaces, the typical and minimum width, the typical and maximum grade or slope, and the cross slope, which we talked about already. Disabled trail users need a lot more information than just that. But this is the sign from the Neidrach Trail trailhead, and unfortunately, it only tells us the length. It also tells us it's a loop, which is helpful, and it tells us the habitats it passes through, which is helpful. This is good information, but we need a lot more information than that. So the Neidrach Trail does not get full marks for that one. So, in summary, I wanted to leave you with a few takeaways about accessible trails. I know this might have seemed like a lot. You can watch the recording or check out the report if you want some refreshers, but a couple of key takeaways here. The first is that there are federal trail accessibility standards. They're not the Americans with Disabilities Act standards. They are the Architectural Barriers Act, Section 1017. The second thing is that they are the minimum standards, and disabled wildlife viewers consistently want land managers to go above and beyond the bare minimum guidelines. Hi, Michelle, I see you there. I'm glad you could join us. We'll get to you in just a minute. So please consider those the minimum and go a lot further. The things you can do to go further, we've included that in the report for the Neidrach Trail and in the literature review report and the focus group recommendations report. So please check them out. Another takeaway is that ongoing maintenance is required for trails that were built as accessible to actually stay accessible. This is just a thing that happens in nature. Erosion happens, rain happens, branches fall down, like stuff happens, and things will not stay the way you built them if you don't maintain them. That, as we saw, is an ongoing challenge. And finally, state wildlife agencies across the US have a really cool opportunity to develop more trails that meet and exceed accessibility guidelines. It was actually quite hard to find an accessible trail run by a state wildlife agency for this case study, and that was through several networks with quite a lot of people across the country, and all the research I did for this book about accessible birding locations. So there's a really big opportunity here for this to be done at state wildlife agencies. The focus groups gave us some recommendations that are low cost that you can start doing today to increase the accessibility of any trails that you already have. The thing about accessibility is that anything you do to increase access increases access. So the first thing, the most significant thing, is to provide that detailed accessibility information for all of your trails, not just the ones that you deem accessible. Start with them and then write them up for all of your trails. Everybody has different access needs and different interests and preferences. And please tell us about this on maps and signs and websites and social media. This is a photo from the Echo River Springs Trail, which is my favorite accessible trail at Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky. And it gives you that information about the length, surface, width, grade, and cross slope for each segment of the trail because it changes along the way. The second thing you can do is add some more thoughtfully placed benches throughout with back support so people can rest. Don't forget, shade is really important and ideally with a view, so something for people to see and enjoy while they're resting on that bench. And prioritize that maintenance. I hope you've got that message today. We've talked quite a lot about maintenance. This is a photo that I took the first day I got to the Neidrach Trail. The day before, a branch had fallen over that safety barrier and the park resources technician had roped that section off. He had removed all the damaged safety barriers and he'd gone and got new lumber and set it there. But then something else came up and he hadn't had the chance to go and actually repair it. But 4 days later, as I left the Neidrach Trail, he had had that chance finally, and he had that the lumber in the safety barrier, and it was all repaired. So he was working on it. He was doing the best he could with all the other things he had to juggle. Please prioritize that maintenance. Finally, some advice from the previous and the current park manager about creating accessible trails. One said, I've learned we might think we know what people need, but we don't always know. That's part of being proactive instead of reactive. We need to be able to talk to people because they're our customers. Make sure that the community is part of it from the beginning. Get more of the input up front instead of after we already have the plan. Again, a great way of doing this is through an accessibility advisory committee. So please check out that webinar and report if you'd like to create one of those. And look for alternative funding. There's a lot of funding out there that can be put towards projects like this. This was Michelle, who we're about to hear from. She said that she had got funding for accessibility improvements from places like hospitals and healthcare organisations because they want people to get out in nature and get the therapeutic benefits of doing so. So you don't only have to look in outdoor recreation spaces for funding for outdoor recreation. Get creative about that. Okay, we have another poll, and I would really love to hear a little bit more from you. So I'm going to launch this right now and give you just a couple minutes to share. Some of these questions are the same as the first ones, and there's a different question as well. Okay, I'll give you a couple more seconds just to finish off any thoughts. I don't want you to miss out on hitting enter if you've written a really great explanation. I'm seeing that it's hard to tell, and a different number of people have answered this question, this poll from the first poll, but it looks like generally folks have got a bit more knowledge about the features that make up an accessible trail after this webinar, which is awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. That's really cool. Okay, 10 more seconds just to get the last little bits in if you need to. All right, I'm going to end the poll right now. Cool. Thanks very much, y'all. Again, I'm very much looking forward to digging into that more. Okay, the final slide I want to share with you is that this is one of four case studies that we're doing in this project. So please, if you'd like to learn more about establishing or reviving an effective loaner track chair program, please come along to our webinar in September. We're going to have a break for the summer, but please come along in September to that webinar. If you can't make it, but you register, we will send you a recording and the report, so don't worry about that. Please register if you're interested. And then in October, we'll have our final webinar about an inclusive birding program. So please register for that as well if you're interested. And please share about this with anyone that you know that you think would benefit from it. If you would like to keep up to date with work we're doing about supporting disabled wildlife viewers, there's a QR code on your screen. Ashley will share the link in the chat as well if that's a bit easier for you. I promise I won't spam you. I'm just going to let you know about these webinars and reports and any other little bits and pieces that we do. I'm not interested in spamming you, so you won't be getting a clogged up inbox from this. The Wildlife Viewing Toolkit is the webpage where all of these resources and a whole lot more are housed. The past reports, summary handouts. There's a one-pager for this report. If your boss is not going to read the whole report, but they might read a page, please send them that page. You can get that from the Wildlife Viewing Toolkit. My email address is freya.mcgregor@vt.edu. Happy to answer any questions about this project. And again, this project was funded by the US Fish and Wildlife Services Multi-State Conservation Grant Program. We're really excited to have been able to benefit from that grant to support you in supporting disabled wildlife viewers. Awesome. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Michelle, I'm so glad you're here. We have a bit of time for some Q&A. So if you have any questions for Michelle, please share them in the chat. I have some questions for Michelle as well. But Ashley, is there anything you want to share from the chat? I haven't had a chance to look at it properly yet.
No, we've had some great comments from the chat, people adding in some perspectives of their own, but no specific questions. So, great opportunity for you to ask Michelle so we can hear a little bit more about Michelle's perspective.
Awesome. Cool. If you have any questions, please share them in the chat. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm late. Good to see you all.
We're glad you're here. So can you tell us why accessibility in the outdoors matters to you?
You know, I think it matters to me because we really want the outdoors to be for everyone. And we all come from a different place and different experiences and challenges. And really, it's just important as land managers that we're able to provide that inclusive, accessible place for everyone.
Cool, thank you very much. So the Neidrach Trail was built before you started working as the park manager at Barr Lake State Park, and you oversaw the redesign of it to the trail that we see now. What did the trail look like when you first started in this role, and what really prompted you to dive into such a big project?
Well, the Neidrach Trail was right by our nature center, and so it was one of the most popular trails. But it was, built in the early '80s, so the boardwalk height, the height of the boardwalk was very low, so that was not ADA compliant. The number of boards in between on the boardwalks were not ADA compliant. If you were in a wheelchair, it was like a straight shot, so there was no area where you could turn around. So, it was Barr Lake is one of the only state parks that has these boardwalks that make it a unique experience where we get people a little bit closer to nature, but then we're still protecting the wildlife in the natural areas. And so we really wanted to make some improvements so that it was a better experience for everybody.
Sure, yeah. One of the people I spoke to said he really liked the boardwalk being out over the water and getting close to it because he wasn't going to be traipsing through the mud to get close to water. He didn't want to damage habitat, but this gave him that opportunity, just like you said. Cool. So when you started this project of redesigning the Neidrach Trail, and as you were going through the project, and then after the new Neidrach Trail was opened, what kind of response did you get from park visitors about it?
People were really excited about the improvements, and I think the biggest thing was that people felt more safe. They felt that it was more welcoming because the old one was kind of rickety. It didn't really have a good stable base on it, and so I think for the majority of the people, it was that they felt safe. And as a park manager and a park ranger, we want to make sure that our park is safe, it's clean, and it's fun. And so all of that goes into all of when we're thinking about projects that we do. And I think safety was the big one.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, you just said welcoming, and it made me think. So I think you weren't here yet, but I shared there's a photo of the nature center with a sign that says "Welcome to Barr Lake Nature Center," and then coming back off the Neidrach Trail, coming towards the nature center over the canal bridge, there's a sort of a archway that says "Welcome back." Were those things that you put in?
Yes.
What
Because
prompted?
I think like because I think a lot of times, like, we can't always be out in the field, right? We can't. Like, we would like to think that we could greet every visitor and welcome them, but we can't. So, what is that extra special touch that we can have out there to make sure that they, that they feel that just that extra special thing that wants them to come back and makes them feel welcome and a part of the park is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never been to another place that had a welcome back sign, and it made me feel really warm and fuzzy. And I wasn't feeling that I was an outsider. It wasn't. I already felt comfortable in this space, but it made me feel like really nice with that addition. So yeah, really cool. Awesome. Did you have any challenges as you were working through this multi-year redesign? And if you did, how did you maybe pick one or two and tell us how you navigated those challenges along the way?
I think one of them was just figuring out. It's still like a $900,000 project, so like funding was a challenge, right? So finding the funding, we always don't have funding within our state system, so looking for those grant opportunities and support from our friends group was important. And then deciding what the best material was. We've over the years in state parks in Colorado, we've used different type of wood on different bridges and such. And so, like, there's tracks or there's epay, and epay is very expensive. We use just treated lumber, but then treated lumber requires routine maintenance of staining. So all the boards on Neidrach before before it went out was stained once before, and we did it all at our shop with the volunteers. And then the contractor put it on, and then we stained it again, and then it gets stained every other year. And there's 3 boardwalks at Barr Lake, and Neidrach is the longest. So really thinking about routine maintenance and what that means and who does that was a big challenge. But it's also, one of the most unique places in our state parks, and especially at Barr Lake, and people love that. We do all our school groups there. We have a haunted or a Halloween trail that we do there. We have a holiday trail where we put lights up in the trees, and so it's just a really unique place. And sometimes those unique places require a little extra care to make sure that they're still nice for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing. I didn't know about all those extra programs that happen along the trail. I do know the statewide interpretation manager said that she does all the training for interpretive guides at Barr Lake, and there's a big meeting room, y'all. There's a big meeting room in the visitor center too, in the nature center, and then she can take people out on this trail, and it doesn't matter what the participants' access needs are; they'll be able to navigate this trail. It's not just visitors who benefit from an accessible trail; it's also staff who have different access needs too. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
And is there any a final like lesson or word of encouragement that you'd like to share with folks who are thinking about beginning from scratch or redesigning or putting in a bit more work into an accessible trail?
I think reaching out to partners, and this webinar is a great resource, and know that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and there are some resources out there. And just to be very intentional from the very beginning, to reach out to many partners and visitors and community to see what the need is. But you don't have to do it by yourself. There's lots of people out there, and it just is going to require some extra work, but it's all worth it in the end.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Michelle. I think that's the perfect way to end this webinar. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Michelle, for being here. Ashley, is there anything you want to add right at the end?
No, thanks so much, Michelle. Really enjoyed hearing from you. It was a great cap on the presentation. And thank you, Freya.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.